What if I told you that there are some really powerful Pokemon that almost nobody is using in competitive right now? Recently, players like Joe Ugarte and his Jumpluff, or Joaquin Salerno and his Orthworm have been taking the scene by storm, but I decided to look even further down, and for this list I compiled 8 Pokemon that are being used on less than 1% of the teams. First up, I want to talk about Iron Moth. Now, Iron Moth's usage stat is 0.97%, so it just barely makes the cut. I feel like Iron Moth is one of those Pokemon that everybody acknowledges is pretty strong. You can't really argue with a 140 base special attack stat, and it's also pretty fast, but it's really difficult to fit onto teams. One of the biggest problems is that its only stabs poison move is Sludge Wave, which hurts the partner Pokemon, so you really need to be pairing it with a strong Steel type or something that doesn't really care about taking the hits. Now, recently, it has seen a little modicum of success over in the Nino Pokebros Scarlet and Violet number 68. Oh, my anti-spoiler Metapods have joined us on this page. You know what? We're just gonna leave them. It's funnier that way. But Jag Samurott was able to win this tournament. This had, I think, 200 or 300 players in this tournament with a 12-1 record running Iron Moth. Now, this is a solo Annihilate team, no mouse hold in sight. It screens Annihilate, but there's ways to boost the Rage Fist up. You have Earthquake on the Ting-Lu, which you can use into Annihilate, especially if it's behind screens or if it has a bulk up or something. It's not going to do an insane amount of damage to your ape, but also Sludge Wave, which is resisted by Annihilate's ghost typing. It's a little bit punishing if you poison yourself, but just simply don't poison yourself. It's fine. But Iron Moth will almost always be carrying this kind of a set. It's going to be Terra Grass, both as a really good defensive type, but also because it gets access to Energy Ball, so you can make that move much stronger. Heat Wave or Fiery Dance tends to be the fire move, and then Sludge Wave and Protect. It has to run Booster Energy, or at least, maybe not has to, but it's been running Booster Energy basically every single time I've ever seen it. Some players will opt for the speed boost, some will opt for the special attack boost. I think generally you'll see the special attack boost on a team that has some speed control, such as an Icy Wind Bundle or Tailwind, whereas you'll probably see the speed boosting variant on a team that doesn't have quite as much speed control, if any at all. Coming in with a usage stat of 0.96, just 1% of 1% below Iron Moth, is the Bun. Dachsbun comes in next. Now, Dachsbun is not a Pokemon that has a lot of different ways you can run it. It does one thing. It sits on the field, takes a Lava Plume from a Chi-Yu probably. You could also use Armarouge if you wanted, or even Torkoal. There's a bunch of Pokemon that get Lava Plume, but basically your idea here is you're going to hit it with a fire move. It doesn't take damage, but it does get a 2 defense boost. And from there, you could just use Body Press. It's really, really difficult to remove from play, especially if you turn it into a Steel type, which keeps its fire immunity from the Well-Baked Body ability. Really, the Dachsbun has 5 moves that it can run. It's always going to run Body Press, it's always going to run Protect, it's always going to run Leftovers, and then the last 2 moves will be 2 of either Yawn, Play Rough, or Wish. We did see Dachsbun have a decent amount of success over in, I believe it was Fort Wayne. That's the wrong screen. Fort Wayne, yes. Brendan King was able to bring Dachsbun to a 19th place finish. That's a 10-4 record, including Day 2 Swiss, with basically this. He was able to run it with the Wish. I believe Wish is cut off on screen, but it's Wish instead of Play Rough. Now, some of the adjustments that I've seen have included Play Rough instead of Wish, which I personally like a lot better because as it stands, if you only have Body Press, you get completely walled by ghosts like Fluttermane. And, Play Rough actually does really, really good damage to Fluttermane because it just doesn't have a lot of physical defense. And you don't want to be fully walled by a ghost type. You're kind of still walled by Golden Go because it resists Play Rough and doesn't really care about you. But other than that, limiting the fact that you don't want your only attacking move to be one that has an immunity against it. So I like the Play Rough variant personally a little bit more. But Dachsbun is a Pokemon that really thrives on the fact that people are going to look at it and go, alright, yeah, Brendan brought this to Fort Wayne, but, I'm not going to hit Dachsbun. I don't need to prep my Dachsbun lines. And it does well because a lot of people just don't have a good way to deal with Scarf Chi-Yu Lava Plume into a Dachsbun. It'll just win against a bunch of teams. So then when you pair that with other strong Pokemon like Azumarill, Dragonite, Chien-Pao, Fluttermane, it can do a really, really good job. Like, you can see this team from Brendan King is a very, very solid team that just happens to have a Dachsbun on it. So I think that's definitely the way you want to run a Dachsbun. You're not going to build the entirety of the team around it, but you could slot it in that 6th spot if it's just what you're missing. Sticking with the Fairy type, but dipping down to a usage stat of 0.61%, we're talking about Tinkaton next. Now, right after Scarlet and Violet came out, Tinkaton had a decent amount of attention, mainly because it has the best typing in the game with Fairy Steel and the best move in Pokemon, in my opinion. Gigaton Hammer is insane. If Tinkaton had an attack stat, this would be insane. I can't wait until the years 2032 and Pokemon Scarlet and Violet Kaizo come out, and Gita has a 160 base attack Tinkaton with Gigaton Hammer. It's gonna be a thing, but Tinkaton is balanced, of course, by its base stats, which sure are some of the base stats of all time. 75 attack does mean that Gigaton Hammer is not exactly going to be the most powerhouse of a move. Regardless, it still does really, really good damage, and Tinkaton gets a lot of other really cool features. It has the Mold Breaker ability, which allows it to do things like nuke a Mimikyu through its disguise with Gigaton Hammer, but also lets you use Thunder Wave on things like Golden Go or on Garganacl. You know, you can status the things that shouldn't be statused. And with moves like Fake Out and Feint, it has some really interesting niche usage as well. Fake Out, of course, not a very niche move, but it's just always good to have. And then Feint is a move that we've been seeing gaining a little bit of popularity, especially on Mousehold. But on Tinkaton, it's also really, really good. If you're not familiar, Feint is a +2 priority move, and what it'll do is it will break Protect. So it's a very weak normal type move. It does, like, basically no damage, but it does do damage. And it will break Protect. It'll also break Wide Guard, things like that. So Tinkaton does have a niche into Pokemon that, especially Pokemon like a Chien-Pao, for example. Personally, I think Chien-Pao is very, very vulnerable to Feint because not only are you going to be losing protection on a Pokemon that likes to spam Protect, you're also going to lose your Sash. So Feint's really good as a Sash breaker, it's really good as a Protect breaker. Thunder Wave is just a great move right now. Games in the current format tend to go very, very long. So if you can paralyze a bunch of your opponent's Pokemon and the game goes for like 15 turns, they're gonna get full parried a lot of times. And then just every now and then you just have a Gigaton Hammer to just launch into them and just do 50% damage to just anything you want, essentially. The issue is that with its Fairy Steel typing, both of those types are so good that you're going to want them elsewhere on a lot of your teams. So you're risking doubling up on typings where maybe you might not want to, and that will make it a little bit more difficult to fit Tinkaton into a lot of teams. That being said, in the Charlotte Regional earlier this year, we did see Wolfie, here we go, at 13th, going 11-3 with, if you watched it, you know, this team... Wolf made a video, and the video was just called something like, I made a team of only bad Pokemon and brought it to a regional. It's a team that doesn't look like it should make a lot of sense. But honestly, he did really, really well with it, and this is the Tinkaton set that he was running. It's the same as the one that I had in the builder, and it's cool. It did a job. Tinkaton, I think, is a Pokemon that continues to be a little bit underrepresented and underexplored. I really don't think it's going to be a Pokemon that ever takes the meta by storm, but I think there are a lot of teams where a Tinkaton could theoretically do a job, and personally, I have it in my builder every other week, really. It never makes it onto the final versions of my teams, if I'm totally honest, but I do try it out a lot, because I think that there's something there. We just need to find it. Priority is very, very important in the current meta of VGC. Pokemon like Jet Punch Palafin, or Extreme Speed Arcanine or Dragonite, even things like Sucker Punch Chien-Pao, there is a lot of priority running around, and that makes a Pokemon like Farigiraf really, really good. So good, in fact, that it's up to 3% usage and it's not valid for this video. So Tsareena is what we're going to talk about here. Oh yeah! Tsareena was a Pokemon that if you played the very, very end of Sword and Shield, basically they introduced Series 13, which was a fake format that doesn't exist, and no one can convince me otherwise, so all of us collectively in the community just decided to go and play Spikemouth Cup, which was a no Dynamax format. And in that format, Tsareena was queen. It was admittedly partially because Grassy Glide Rillaboom was everywhere, but I think in some ways you could compare that to Jet Punch Palafin. Queenly Majesty is an ability that protects your side of the field from priority moves. Jet Punch, Sucker Punch, Bullet Punch, Extreme Speed Punch, Fake Out Punch, Feint Punch. Okay, not all of those are punching moves, but they are all priority moves, and they cannot affect you if Tsareena is on the field. Tsareena is not as good as Farigiraf, just utility-wise, because Farigiraf does get access to Trick Room, and also Imprison, so, like, if you want to play Trick Room, you can, but if you want to not play Trick Room, you can. Tsareena, though, does have a really impressive attack stat. Tsareena's attack stat is 120, that's the same as Qianpao. So, she does big damage, and she has a reasonable amount of coverage. She did lose access to Triple Axle in this generation, which honestly would have made her really, really impressive in this format. But Tsareena still has access to moves like Power Whip, a massive 120 base power grass move, Play Rough for fairy coverage, U-Turn for both pivoting, and also because, honestly, Bug, not the worst offensive type when there's a lot of dark types running around. And then finally, I included Terra Blast on this list because I feel like water is a natural Terra type for Tsareena. It's the best defensive type in the game, and it also works really nicely because Tsareena is naturally weak to fire. So you're able to turn that weakness into a resistance, and gives you Terra Blast. Water's a pretty good offensive type, but there's a lot of other moves that this Pokemon gets. You can get Drop Kick for a slightly weaker but more accurate grass move, and then moves like Low Kick, Rapid Spin if you're worried about Stealth Rock Tinglu, which is a thing that exists, Trailblaze, Zen Headbutt. There's a lot of coverage options that Tsareena gets. So I really do think that Tsareena is a Pokemon that's really, really underexplored. With Power Whip, obviously you one-shot Iron Bundle, but you also one-shot Bulky Fluttermane, which is really, really cool. Obviously stopping Palafin's Jet Punch is really, really big. And then moves like a High Jump Kick, for example, 130 base power fighting type move. If you wanted to run like Terra Fighting High Jump Kick, I don't have a calc in front of me right now, but part of me wants to say that like one-hit KOs Tinglu. Okay, it actually doesn't, but it does if you have Qianpao on the field. The more you know. Overall, Tsareena is a Pokemon that is pretty solid offensively, and then also just has one of the best abilities in the game. Most of the time, Farigiraf is going to work better for teams that want some kind of priority prevention, but if you're building a team and you realize that maybe you want a physical attacker, or Farigiraf's typing isn't quite what you want for the balance of your team, Tsareena might be a good Pokemon to look at. And then you could be one of the cool people, one of the cool 0.51% of people who are running Tsareena. Next up, with a usage stat of 0.31%, we have Gallade. Now, some Pokemon have very defined roles. We have our Prankster Tailwind users that kind of exist to set Tailwind and then get off the board so something else can take use of it. And some Pokemon just have a very simple job of trading well. Gallade is one of those Pokemon. It's kind of the only thing it can do effectively, but with a Focus Sash and the ability Sharpness, it's a really interesting thing to look at. Personally, I think Gallade has a lot of potential. I also think it's really, really, really difficult to use well. Gallade has a new ability called Sharpness. Sharpness provides a 1.5 times boost to anything that counts as a cutting or a slicing move, which is all of the moves I've put in the moveset here, and a bunch of other ones that Gallade also gets access to, like Night Slash. Now, this basically gives Gallade a Choice Band boost on any of these moves, without having to run a Choice Band. So you can just slap a Focus Sash on it to compensate for the complete and utter lack of bulk that Gallade has on the physical side, and try to get a good trade. With Sharpness, and with a base attack stat of 125, a lot of these moves are going to be one-hit KOing things, and on top of that, a lot of them have high crit rates as well, which is also kinda cool. So Gallade can really be the Pokemon that you either send out at the beginning to try to pick off a big target, or leave till the end and try to position for a 1v1. If your opponent has one Pokemon left and you have a Sashed Gallade, chances are they'll hit you, you'll live on Sash, and then you'll hit them and you'll win the game. Again, though, it is kind of hard to make this work consistently. That being said, I've definitely seen some good players experimenting with Gallade in the past couple of months, even if they haven't ended up bringing it to tournaments. There's some thought going into it, and I think there's going to be a period of time where we see a Gallade do well. I don't think it's ever going to be a big meta threat, but there's going to be a Gallade somewhere. So I wasn't originally going to put this one on this list, but I kind of have to now. And it's Hawlucha. Now, if you didn't watch the last regional in Portland, you probably don't know what I'm talking about. But Peter Chen finished 25th with a Hawlucha and a Sandy Shocks. Now, his Hawlucha was Flying Press, Acrobatics, Swords Dance, and Detect with Unburden and Psychic Seed to pair off of the Indeedee. Basically, in a nutshell, what happens is Hawlucha is on the field next to Indeedee. Indeedee activates Psychic Terrain. Psychic Terrain activates the Psychic Seed, which gives Hawlucha a special defense boost while activating Unburden, which then doubles Hawlucha's speed, and then because there's no held item anymore, Acrobatics also has its power doubled. Bit of a mouthful, but basically, Hawlucha on Psychic Terrain, go burr. So Hawlucha, to me, feels like a really interesting piece that works super well if you can make it work, but it also feels incredibly constricting in the team builder. It feels to me like you have to run Psychic Seed, which forces you to run Indeedee, which in turn kind of feels wasted unless you're also running Armarouge. So then you're looking at a team of Armarouge, Indeedee, Hawlucha, and you're forced into that trio, which leaves you very little room to build the rest of the team out. Personally, I looked at this because Hawlucha, I don't know if you've noticed, is a bird, so I was like, oh, this seems really cool. I wonder if I could build a Tailwind Trick Room team with this. Hawlucha doesn't get Tailwind. Like, every other bird gets Tailwind, but Hawlucha doesn't get Tailwind. So, because of that on top of everything else, I feel like while Hawlucha slots perfectly into Peter Chen's team, and there's definitely other ways to build it out around that core of 3, I have found it a little limiting, which is why I think it's this low down on the usage list, but it can do a job. It has proven that it can do a job, and if you want to try out a weird niche Pokemon that might catch people off guard, Hawlucha. In a similar vein to Hawlucha, we're jumping down now to the very depths. We're going to the 0.1% usage stat of Revavroom. I love Revavroom. I think he's such a silly little guy. I just love that there's a poison car Pokemon. I think that's really stupid in the best possible way. Now, longtime viewers of the channel, the people who've been here for 3 months, will know that I tried to build Revavroom a while ago, and it went exceptionally poorly. Revavroom has a really cool signature move. It's a 100 base power steel move called Spin Out that is fully accurate, and the only downside is that it lowers your speed by 2 stages. That's a really good move. But you know who didn't agree? Zach Emerzian, who showed up to the Portland Regional and ran Revavroom and got points. Now, 87th doesn't seem quite as impressive as some of the top finishes, but you think of the fact that he's running Revavroom and he won 6 of his 9 matches, that's pretty impressive. Now, you can see the team that he was running, Hydreigon's a weird call right now, Friendguard, Widelens, Mousehold, Volcarona. It's a very Zach Emerzian team. If you're not familiar with Zach, he got to the finals of a regional with Necrozma last year, and did really well and made Day 2 at Vancouver with Iron Valiant. So, that's who Zach is. He is one of the big creative large galaxy brains of the scene, so of all the people to run Revavroom, not surprised that it was Zach. But overall, he seems to have figured out a good moveset for it. And this is the set he's using. Essentially, Revavroom has a really, really good defensive typing of Steel Poison. You're very weak to Ground, but you're not weak to that much else. And both of those individual types are really good defensively right now. Poison helps to cover the weakness of Fighting on the Steel side of things as well. And Steel does the same for the Psychic weakness of Poison. So they cover each other very well if you don't get hit by ground moves. Revavroom also has the ability Overcoat, which functions essentially the same as Safety Goggles. It makes it immune to powder moves, and Sandstorm damage, and Effect Spore. It's literally the same thing as Safety Goggles, but as an ability, which also clears up the item slot to run Clear Amulet. So Revavroom essentially cannot have its stats lowered, cannot be spored, cannot be redirected by Rage Powder, all of those fun things, which means that you can use its pretty effective 119 attack stat to hit things pretty hard with Iron Head and Poison Jab. Shift Gear operates as a speed control mechanism to boost the speed by 2 and the attack by 1. That's actually really, really good. Shift Gear is a crazy setup move. It's just better Dragon Dance, which is already crazy. And then when you have that setup, plus 1 attack, Iron Head and Poison Jab are going to start doing real damage. So the Revavroom is a really, really cool piece of the puzzle that Zach was able to use on his team. I've mentioned the ground weakness a couple times. That's where things get a little bit tough, because Pokemon like Garchomp or Great Tusk or Sandy Shocks is around a little bit as well. Dozo running Earthquake. There's a lot of Pokemon that do carry the ground type coverage. Ting-Lu's a Pokemon, for God's sake. So all of those things make Revavroom not as effective as it would be, but I really like the set that Zach has put together here. You do have the Terra Water type as well to be able to go from being ultra weak to ground to at least neutral. It's also just, as we've talked about earlier, the best defensive type right now. And overall, the Revavroom is better than 0.1% usage implies. Finally, rounding out the list with a usage stat of 0.09, it's Rotom-Mow, which I think is maybe the best Rotom form right now. This one is... it's just overlooked a lot because people think Rotom and they're like, oh, Rotom Heat, Rotom Wash, those are the good ones. I think Rotom-Mow's really good right now. I have used this Pokemon a fair bit. It's been really good for me, and this has been the set that I've been using. You know, Thunderbolt, Leaf Storm, Will-O-Wisp, Protect. It has Levitate, so it's able to just wall things like Ting-Lu. It walls things like Dondozo a lot of the time. A lot of the Dondozos these days are running moves that are all resisted by Rotom, plus you can Wisp it, so you can just wall the Dondozo really effectively. Leaf Storm is a really cool move to have because it one-shots Iron Bundles that Terrastalize away from the Water type. So, yeah, Thunderbolt one-shots Bundle, but if you're worried they might Terra Ghost or something, just Leaf Storm them. They go down anyway. And Rotom is just pretty bulky. I think generally you do want to build this on a team with screens, maybe a Klefki team, or Friend Guard probably works too if you're running a Maushold team. But Rotom is really solid. With the Terra Electric type, you could give him no weaknesses because of the Levitate ability. That's fun. Or I've also been playing around a little bit with Terra Fire to do a little bit better into the Chi-Yu bundle Flutter Mane stuff. That's also a pretty good Terra type to have on this Rotom. And then Citrus Berry, Wiki Berry, Healing Berry of any kind is pretty great. The other thing that's really nice about Rotom is that Thunder Wave has picked up quite a lot in usage over the last few weeks, and Rotom is immune to it. Rotom is also immune to Spore, which the other Rotom forms aren't. So Rotom-Mow gets you a lot of these really interesting pieces that the other Rotom forms just don't get you. I think that Rotom-Mow is a really good Pokemon. I am on the Rotom-Mow train. It definitely doesn't fit onto every team, but I've seen a lot of teams of people that I'm friends with, that they've been building out teams, they've been on 5 Pokemon, they've been like, oh, what's the last Pokemon? And Rotom-Mow patches a lot of the things that they're missing answers for. It's a really interesting piece, and I hope that some of you out there definitely decide to try it. So those are my 8 underused Pokemon that I think are actually pretty strong into the current format. Are there any that you think I missed? Are there Pokemon that you've really enjoyed building with that the rest of the community seems to be ignoring? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, of course, subscribe, ring the bell, leave a like. I won't be uploading videos for a little while because I'm going to be moving to a new city in the next few days after the Hartford Regional, but videos will be back in probably a week and a half, 2 weeks, something like that, as will the streams. So thank you for your patience, and of course I can't wait to bring you more content after the move. I hope you're all having a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, or night, whatever it is, wherever you are in the world, and I'll see you guys next time.